One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the base is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, one and all, to another episode of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes. It's Trey Reeves, it's Garrett Turney, it's waiting on Mitch Mason to return from gallivanting across the state of Alabama. But Garrett, we're here this week, and it's kind of a dead zone for college football right now, but we did just pass April Fool's Day, so I got to ask you a couple things real quick off the top. One, do we like the social media trends of the April Fool's Day joke, or is that kind of played out to you?
I think it's actually both. It's played out, but every single year it's kind of a familiar thing. To me, I treat it like the groundhog, where it's like, okay, I get it. The groundhog's going to come out and see his shadow. Okay, cool. But like, it's old. But then there's a part of you that's like, it's a nice American tradition, right? It's an American tradition to, tease this town in Philadelphia that their groundhog really controls the weather. But it's also a fun little thing to say, hey, you know what? Like, we can go on and like look at the worst trade possible and pretend it's an April Fool's joke, and then that's kind of a fun little thing. Honestly, I would expect to see something like a Luka trade for Anthony Davis as like a April Fool's type of trade. Like, oh, haha, I can't believe the Mavericks actually traded Luka Doncic. That's crazy. But it's some of these trades maybe not actually April Fool's jokes, but yeah, it's fun to see the ones that are actually like oh, did you see that your coach just got fired? Or, oh, did you see that your favorite player just transferred out? Or there was like some crazy trade. It's fun. It's harmless. Some people get got by it. My favorite is to see which of the national guys actually get got in like that 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. range where they haven't quite woken up, but they don't want to be late to something. That's always fun to see who gets got.
That is absolutely a tradition unlike any other. I'm glad you said that, because that is really fun to see who gets absolutely just does not know their calendar and does not remember what day it is. You're giving them grace saying it's in the morning, but I see people all day long most years. I feel like most of these big brand social media jokes and things like that kind of peaked maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when this was really a big thing. You had some really great ones back in the day that really got a lot of people, and I think we're now kind of just as a populace, especially as a college football populace, kind of wise to this now. And maybe some people even have it like marked on their calendar. Don't believe anything you see on Twitter today. Oh, yeah. But there were some good ones this year. I think the field changes are always good ones. I saw Arizona State's actually looked pretty cool with the maroon field that
I actually kind of like that.
I wouldn't be against that if they wanted to do that in real life. But
that actually is kind of a good way if you're a program that needs to announce something that's maybe controversial. Throw it out there as an April Fool's joke, and then go like, "Hey, that's a joke." And then when all your friends are like, "I actually wouldn't be mad about this," you're like, "All right, go ahead and press go or press send, or let's get that one up to the board or something." That's kind of a funny one I hadn't thought about till just now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can kind of soft launch some things. Kind of we joke about programs doing that with coaching hires, right? That they kind of maybe let something leak out to the media, and I'm hearing this person, just to kind of gauge the fan base reaction. But that's absolutely that's a great strategy. If you're any athletic department listening to the show, we know that you guys all listen to the show. Sure. But maybe think about that next year if you have a controversial decision. But Garrett, the other thing I have, a little more personal outside of the football world, as a future educator, as an educator of America's future, where does April Fool's Day rank for you amongst worst days on the calendar year in the school year?
It's funny because I don't think that a lot of students realize they're not as wise as they think they are. They just come in a little too hot. I had people trying to come in there and just do the whole like, Mr. Turney, my laptop got exploded, and I'm like, stop. You're trying way too hard, right? And it was a lot of those types of jokes where they try a little bit too tough. Some of them have done better in the past. There have been some that have been more successful, but no, it's a funny day, I think, because it'll work on some of the older educators, but some of us that are a little bit younger and more chronically online or things like that, we're a little wiser to the things happening. We've already seen the tweets in our morning to kind of freshen us up and get us ready to go. Oh yeah, I guess it's April Fool's Day, so I should be watching out for those.
Were there any trendy things this year? Was there anything that was
Honestly,
coming
they
over
were
from
a little
TikTok
bit
or anything like
quieter,
that?
like, a little bit quieter this year. There weren't
Okay.
that many. There were a couple of my first that just tried to really get me, but after about first to second period, it was just pretty much just gone. It just, I think it's also a thing with this generation. This is a topic for a separate podcast of just this generation not really wanting to put themselves out there or do anything unless it can be like seen as ironic, because they don't want to like really go into like social risk or stuff like that. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's for a generation that goes to school in their pajamas. I don't know that there's a whole lot of effort getting put into pranks and things like that.
Come for the football talk, stay for the social commentary. This is not an April Fool's podcast, but we are do have a theme with this today. We're going to talk foolish decisions, and I know this is coming out a little bit after April 1st, so you'll know that this is not any way, shape, or form a joke because it's coming out a little bit after April Fool's. But we're talking foolish decisions in the college football world today. We're going to have some categories a little bit later on. To answer my own question, as a former educator of America's future, my kids were a little bit younger than the ones that you teach. Middle school versus high school, it was top 3 worst day on the calendar for me when I was a teacher because it. And you mentioned just the needing a lack of creativity, maybe for some.
Oh yeah.
At that age, at the age that I was teaching, it was all a lack of creativity. It was just dumb and dumb at best and destructive at worst. So
Oh yeah.
I think top 3 worst. I don't know the exact order, but Halloween, Valentine's Day, and April
Oh,
Fools.
Halloween's atrocious. In the high school level, it's the day before prom. Day before
Mm,
prom, nothing happens. It's zero productivity, and it's just they're all just amped up. They're all just getting ready for the weekend, talking about which parties they're going to. It's degeneracy. It just is what it is.
well, like I said, come for the football talk, stay for the social commentary and the commentary on the next generation. But Garrett, we do have some college football stuff to talk about. Before we get into the foolish decisions conversation, we do have some news that we want to go over. Before we get into that, make sure that you are liking and subscribing at all the places. Follow us at 3Tech Pod on X, Twitter, Instagram, and check out the YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/@3techpod. Make sure that you are liked and subscribing to make sure you're not missing any of the big content that we are putting out this offseason, heading into preview season as we get inching closer and closer. Garrett, not a lot of news in recent days in the college football world, but 2 really big pieces of news as we kind of, like I said, are in the doldrums of the offseason. Spring football starting. That seems to be meaning less and less every year as programs are canceling spring games. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want. But the 2 big pieces of news this week were coaching related. Stanford, fresh off of Andrew Luck, the GM, firing Troy Taylor amid some bullying accusations within that athletic department. He reaches out to an old friend. They are going to hire Frank Wright as their interim head coach. He's, of course, the former Colts and Panthers head coach. He was Andrew Luck's head coach when he was in Indianapolis. I thought this was kind of funny just on the surface because Luck kind of left him high and dry. If you'll remember how that turned out, there were quite a few people. Andrew Luck retired right before the season started. I think that was 2017, 2018-ish. And really left Frank Reich kind of high and dry, leaving right before the season started. So in a weird reversal, and Frank Reich's going to come in and kind of save Andrew Luck when he's in a little bit of a tight spot when it might be hard to find somebody. But yeah, Garrett, outside of that, any hot takes or thoughts on this hire?
I honestly really like the hire. I think it's a great move. Outside of the fact that you could maybe say, okay, well, Frank Reich's a little old. Okay, well, maybe he's a little bit past the prime, maybe a little bit out of the game. And, obviously modern college football has become something else with, NIL, transfer portal, everything else that we've all become so used to over the past several years. For a guy who's, been out of it, been in the pro level, hasn't really been in the college game, at least in a while, It's definitely something that I think will take some getting used to, but it's the same logic behind hiring a guy like Bill Belichick outside of the skins on the wall. It's a guy who has had success at the NFL level, a guy who has done a good job. And honestly, I mean, I don't hate the move. I think that for a program like Stanford, where you're having to compete in a power conference and try to compete for a spot at the top when you don't have as many resources. Maybe your program isn't necessarily as vaunted as others, and you're definitely not recently competitive. Getting a good coach that can kind of stabilize, there's some trust between him and obviously Andrew Luck. There's a lot of trust there. I think it's a good move. I really like it. I think it's going to be good for them to get some program stability. It's a good person to work with and understand like who you're working across from, what their tendencies are, and things like that. And obviously, like, yeah, Luck left him high and dry a little bit, but it couldn't have been that bad because he's coming back to work for him. And so there's a lot of trust there. And when it comes to guys who I trust to make good decisions, really hard to think of a guy outside of Andrew Luck.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit on our last episode. Mitch and I did, with Andrew Luck handling the GM role for Stanford, his alma mater. And right off the bat, he has to make a really tough decision. We haven't really seen a tough GM decision. We haven't seen a GM fire a head coach at the college football level. So that's really interesting to see how that's playing out at Stanford. The one thing that I am concerned about as this goes as a decision, we don't see this all the time. Obviously, it's really difficult to make a head coaching hire, a decision like this in March. And his hand was really forced with the bullying accusations and all that that's going on behind the scenes. I do wonder how Stanford is able to sell this for the future. If I'm a high school recruit, or if I'm someone who's maybe considering Stanford in this spring portal window that's coming up, I don't know that I can really plan my future around going to Stanford right now, because it's been reported that this is a 1-year deal. There's not any expectation of coming up or lasting any longer than this 1 year interim situation. So if I'm a high school kid, I don't know what kind of offense we're running. I don't know what kind of defensive scheme we're running. There's not really a lot of loyalty to anybody on the coaching staff if you bring in a new head coach after this year. So yeah, it's a really difficult situation. Obviously, Andrew Luck's hands were tied here, but it's not just going to affect Stanford this year. I have a bad feeling it's going to affect them for several years as they adjust to the ACC.
Yeah, I would say the best case for them is if they do something to kind of like bring in a coach early and say like, hey, this is going to be our guy for next year. Like, let's start the process. Let's just say we're moving on. Like, we know this is a 1-year deal. You're here to captain the ship for the year, but let's bring in somebody new and he can do the recruiting and the building relationships and the, implementing his system, his staff, his process, whatever it is. Like, if they do that early, I think this works out pretty okay, because that gives that coach kind of a season off of not having to do the full-time head coach thing. And you can just recruit, just scout, just build your pipeline, whatever it is you want to do. Like, you just get the chance to do that. That could be really good for Stanford if they wait through the season to say like, oh, maybe we'll extend or maybe something. I just don't see that going well.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. But the only problem with that is your pool is very shallow if you're looking at guys that aren't actively coaching somewhere this year. Unless you're looking, you got to look outside of college football. You got to look to maybe the NFL or somebody that's not a sitting coach right now, somebody that's been fired or is taking a couple years off. So, hey, Jimbo Fisher, New Stanford.
That could be an option. You might see if there's a coordinator somewhere that might want a shot or something like that. So,
yeah, I think Jimbo Fisher to Stanford. Let's just start that rumor.
Hey, come on, let's do it.
The other piece of news this week, Garrett, in the past couple weeks, I should say, Coach Prime got his bag, man. They finalized an extension at Colorado. So Coach Deion Sanders, 5-year, $54 million contract is where it stands right now. He's going to make $10 million this year, and then it'll increase over the next 4 seasons after that. That $10 million a year salary is makes him the 5th highest paid coach in the country, tied for 5th highest paid coach in the country. So big reward after a big jump in wins over the last couple of years. Obviously, a lot of talent is leaving this year to the NFL, bringing in a ton of guys in the transfer portal. That seems like it's going to be the pattern for Deion Sanders at Colorado. What are your thoughts on this extension? Is this a good move for Colorado to lock up the future, or maybe a little too soon?
Well, you just said Jimbo Fisher, so my brain's going to maybe not the smartest contracts. I think this is a risk, but I also think it makes a lot of sense for Colorado. Um, if you're Colorado, you were, before Dion was there, a program in absolutely oblivion. There's nothing going for you whatsoever. And a guy comes in and gives you any spark of life, you should find a way to extend him. Dion has done really well there so far. I mean, it's, is it just because his son was very good and played really well at the quarterback spot and kind of overcame some things? Is it because he did a really good job getting Travis Hunter there? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the problem or what the solution is for them long term. I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain success as a developmental team, if they're going to try to go just the straight portal route. We've talked about that with a lot of teams, being just the, hey, we're going to rebuild in the portal every single year and just see what happens. Some of those teams have done well. Some of those teams not so much. Who knows what's next for Deion Sanders in that program? But what I will say is if you're Colorado, it makes a lot of sense to lock him up. And especially with all the rumors that were swirling with him as kind of a hot candidate for, name your team. I mean, it was getting as crazy as to say, like, I think Jerry Jones is going to hire him to be the new Cowboys coach. When those rumors are swirling around your coach, go lock him up. And so the fact that they're able to get a deal done to get him paid, give him resources, get him what he needs to hopefully run a good program at Colorado, I think it's smart from the Colorado side, whether it succeeds or not, right? If this was a program that was more of a Alabama type program, I think this is a bad move, right? Because you're locking up a guy who has had a brief amount of success and hasn't quite gotten to the top yet. I don't think you make that move if you're in Alabama or a Georgia or Ohio State or a team like that. However, for a team like Colorado, who before this guy you weren't very much at all, I'm okay with this as a move.
I'm right there with you. I think this is a great move for Colorado. Relevance to the program. He's brought all the relevance that Colorado could possibly dream of. And he's a great talent, acquirer of talent. Like, I know that he's going to lose a lot of production this year. Might take a step back in the win-loss total this year too, to be quite honest. But I am really excited to see what kind of talent he can continue to bring in. People always talk about that it's his son, and obviously it's a little easier to recruit a son, but the man recruited Travis Hunter to Jackson State before he went to Colorado. So the man knows how to sell a program and sell a vision to really talented athletes and recruits. So I think this is a great move for Colorado. Now, you also said, you mentioned the Dallas Cowboys opening this year. There's another opening potentially in Tallahassee next fall where Dion went to college that might be wanting to call him home come October and November. So any more barriers you can put up to that are really interesting as well.
I was going to kind of go that direction and say, like, hey, you might want to worry about some of those things too, because we've seen with the program built through the portal type of thing, we've seen it succeed, we've seen it fail. I mean, we saw what happened last year with Florida State. You took a team that barely misses the playoff, and you make them one of the worst teams in all of college football. That's not great, and it's because they missed on portal guys, right? And these were guys that were pretty highly touted, but they just missed. Their evaluations were bad. They didn't get the guy that they should have gotten. It's really important to evaluate talent and not just to get the big name and to get the flashy name, but to get the guy who's good for your program, who's going to work well with the guys around him, and who's going to ultimately let you succeed. We've seen it work. Like, it's not to say that this can't be a philosophy that gets you a good program. You look at Ole Miss. Ole Miss does this pretty consistently, where they go to the portal and they're gonna rate it every single season for the best people they can possibly find. And yet there is definitely an aspect of program building within that team, but they have definitely built their program through the transfer portal. So it can succeed. You can get where you're trying to go at times, but it can also end up failing you like it did with Mike Norvell at Florida State this last year. So, just curious to see where it goes for him. Curious to see kind of how he continues. His next crop is going to have to be successful as well, as opposed to his previous group of students who went through there and were able to kind of succeed and go on. We'll see what the next group has.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to follow the Buffs this year and see how that plays out. Gary, anything else you want to talk about in the news portion before we move on to foolish decisions?
I'm too excited to talk about these foolish decisions, man. It's been a little bit of a slow couple of weeks in the college football world. Let's talk about some of this bad decision making on some programs' behalf.
Well, let's do it again. In the spirit of April Fools, we are talking foolish decisions throughout college football history. I went mostly recent history in this, and we broke this down into 4 categories. So before we get started, here's the 4 categories that we're going to talk about. We've got coaches making a big move that blew up in their face, foolish firings, worst hires, and then a miscellaneous kind of grab bag category for the last one. Garrett, tons of fun to go down memory lane here. Obviously, before anyone says it, we're doing this with the benefit of hindsight. And in the moment, most of these looked like defendable positions, I'll say. But with the benefit of hindsight being 2020, we can obviously just point and laugh at all of these situations now, Garrett. I'd love to start with coaches making a big move that blows up, if that works for you.
Fantastic.
All right, let's talk about it. So I've got 4 here. And if you're Jimmy or Joe listening to this or watching on YouTube, make sure that you say in the comments if you have an extra one. Just kind of went with the top 4 or 5 for each of these categories, but tons, obviously, throughout the college football universe in the past few years. This is going back a few years, but the first one I have, Garrett, is Rich Rod. If you remember, he had West Virginia within whiskers of a BCS national championship game appearance in 2007. Goes off to Michigan. It does not go well. I also have Scott Frost going from UCF to Nebraska. Willie Taggart's kind of double move within a couple of years. He started at South Florida, then he went to Oregon, then after 1 year at Oregon, went to Florida State. And then Dan Mullen moving from Mississippi State to Florida. Garrett, the floor is yours. If you want to focus in on 1 or 2 of these, we can kind of debate which one of these is the most foolish.
I'll say in terms of foolish, I don't know that I can blame Scott Frost, but I think that's the one that hurts the worst, right? It's he had something going at UCF. He was doing a really good job out there, and then the chosen child, right? Going home and getting to come back and lead a program, and it's a program that should be good, and it's a program that has the resources. They always sell out. It's vaunted Nebraska, and you get to go home and do this, and it just did not work out. And I think that's one that really sucks for everybody involved. It sucks for Nebraska fans who really wanted him to succeed. It sucks for him who wanted to go home and do something really good. Just a really hard situation to look at and a hard situation to analyze there. In terms of foolishness, I think it's got to be Dan Mullen. And that's not to trash on him. I still think he's a pretty good coach. But he went for Florida when he had built Mississippi State into something, right? He had built Mississippi State, who, honestly, not the team that you think of as the vaunted SEC power typically, but he had built them up into being a really continuously competitive program who was constantly pushing, constantly right there. He had his thing going, and he made what I would consider kind of a lateral move to another SEC team that he didn't need to make. He didn't need to make the jump to Florida. I know that the name brand sounds good. I know that all that sounds nice, but he just didn't need to make that move, in my opinion. He didn't need to ditch an SEC program for another SEC program when his SEC program was already succeeding. Really, the only reason to do that is to get Nick Saban out of your way for your division at that point. But, he was building up and competing with them pretty much every single year. So I think in terms of bad decisions, I would say Dan Mullen, but the Scott Frost decision really hurts if you're him.
Man, that Scott Frost, it's the most defensible one, right? Because it's mama calling him home. But they were claiming national championships in Orlando. And moving home to Nebraska, it's hard because of the nostalgia. And everybody thought that it would work. Obviously, he's a former quarterback, played there. Everybody thought that was a slam dunk hire when Nebraska made that hire. But, man, you just got to think. And we'll talk a little bit more about Nebraska here in one of these next categories. But you just got to think that Scott Frost could have waited a little bit longer or parlayed his success into maybe a bigger job than Nebraska, right? Like he was on the short list for any opening that he wanted, and going out and, getting a sweetheart deal with his hometown team, really not the best career move in the long run when you look at it.
And I can't blame him for it because that's, the hometown team, right? It's who you played for. It's who you want to go back to. So I can't really blame him because I think that's something that's really appealing to a lot of people. It'd be appealing for me, right? Anyone that, starts to believe in yourself, builds a big program, gets an opportunity to head your school. Yeah, most people are going to take that job. But yeah, like if you're just looking at it on paper, probably not his best career move.
Well, let me talk about the other 2 real quick before we move on, because you mentioned obviously Scott Frost, and Dan Mullen, I think, obviously had the best situation that he was leaving. He was the sitting SEC head coach, and that's tough to leave. But these two guys, Rich Rod and Willie Taggart, were maybe making a big jump before they were quite ready, to be quite honest, as a head coach. But Rich Rod less so, because he had been at West Virginia for quite a while. He had been at West Virginia for 7 seasons. He had won at least 8 games in 6 of those 7 seasons, 6 straight seasons. He started 3-8 his first year, but the next 6 he won at least 8 games every single year. He finished his last 3 years, Garrett, at West Virginia 11-1 in the Big East champions, 11-2 second place in the Big East, and 10-2 tied for first in the Big East. He made BCS Bowl 2 out of 3 years, went to the Sugar Bowl and went to the Fiesta Bowl. And like I mentioned, he was a Pat McAfee missed 25-yard field goal or whatever it was away from literally taking West Virginia to the BCS National Championship game.
Yeah.
Had a ton of fun in that offense. He was getting guys in, bought in left and right, was recruiting the right talent to that place. Then he goes to Michigan, and he lasts 3 seasons. It's 3-9, 5-7, 7-6 before he's let go in Michigan. Willie Taggart, on the other hand, definitely was not ready for the jump that he made from South Florida to Oregon. It's 3 years at Western Kentucky, 4 years at South Florida. By the end of his time at South Florida, he had taken them from 2-10 his first year to 10-2 in 2016. Had a ton of talent coming back, including his starting quarterback, but decides to go to Oregon. He then leaves Oregon after 1 year of going 7-5. He replaces Jimbo Fisher at Florida State and doesn't make it through 2 years at Florida State. So it's hard for me to pick anyone other than Willie Taggart as just the most foolish. I get getting the bag while you can. Like, I totally get striking while the iron's hot, because you never know. You could go not 10-2 the next year. You could have a poor season at South Florida, and then no one wants you the next year. So you take Oregon while you can, but certainly trying to follow up Jimbo Fisher and the bare cupboard that he left at Florida State was a rough decision for Willie Taggart.
Yeah, it felt like Taggart was a guy who got over his skis the most, right? Where he just kind of got into a situation he really couldn't handle. The other guys, obviously, you can't really blame some of the decision-making, maybe some bad decisions overall. Maybe the thought process was wrong. But yeah, Willie Taggart just kind of got in a situation he wasn't ready for.
Ironic that 2 of these guys are back to their original stomping grounds, right? Rich Rod and Scott Frost are both back at West Virginia and UCF, respectively. So you could say that, hey, maybe they've hit reset and the decision wasn't that bad, right? Maybe, and we'll learn from that. But
yeah, maybe.
Dan Mullen's a sitting head coach. Willie Taggart, for me, that's the worst one. I don't know if you want to debate on that, but I think that those moves were the worst to me in my mind.
Sure. Yeah, I think Willie Taggart's definitely the worst move. I think I still don't understand Dan Mullen's decision. I still think it's a bad decision to say, like, I'm sitting here at an SEC power, like that he's built up to an SEC power, and I want to trade that for another SEC team. Like, I just swap, your same conference, but just want to swap to a different. I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me.
Let me just look up really quickly the numbers on Dan Mullen there, because you're right. He had built them up. They were ranked number 1 at one point in 2014. Mm-hmm. I guess in his mind, he might have just felt like they hit their ceiling, that he wasn't going to be able to really truly break through in the SEC West at that time. Because you think back to the 2017 SEC West, you've got Alabama competing for championships, LSU, Auburn, Ole Miss. I think they still had Hugh Freeze at that point. Maybe it was right after Hugh Freeze had been fired, but it was a tough division. So maybe jumping to the other side of the East, I don't know. I remember being really surprised that Florida fired him when they did too, though. So weird situation. He didn't seem like he wanted the smoke of a big time program. So I won't argue with you there. I think it's either Willie Taggart or Dan Mullen. But let's move to category 2. We'll talk foolish firings. So the other end of the spectrum, obviously leaving your school and trying to upgrade your situation and not working out, is on the coach. But let's talk about coaches moving on from programs moving on from a coach, either firing them or forcing them to retire. and it really backfiring on them. So I've got 4 here for you, Garrett. I've got Mike Leach at Texas Tech, Bo Pelini at Nebraska, Ruffin McNeil at East Carolina, and Mark Mangino at Kansas. And I'll just asterisk this right here. There were a lot of accusations with Mangino and Leach, of course, but
Sure.
we're operating under the assumption that maybe the school didn't fully investigate this or didn't really maybe should have taken, I don't know. Mangino's a little tougher for me because of the accusations of how far he allegedly went with players, but we're just going to talk about this in the context of their success on the field and what the school was not able to accomplish after they left, I guess, for both Leach and Mangino.
Right. Leach is the one where I think the accusations don't make any sense. I understand the situation, and the problem really for him was that the kid's dad worked at ESPN, and that's my biggest issue with him. But that's neither here nor there. Really, the big thing with all of these in terms of foolish firings, I think the worst of those was probably Leach, and I understand the context around it. I understand the controversy around it, but that's got to be the worst decision. Leach had them, humming on all cylinders. He had built up a program. He had made guys like Graham Harrell look like gods, and he made this program good. And we just, what was it? Did Texas Tech just hit their highest win total since the Leach era? Or they finally got to like 7 or 8 wins or something like that for the first time since Leach had done it. I can't remember what the number was.
Yeah, I've got that number right here if you want it.
Yeah.
So right before Leach, in the years before Leach, it was the Spike Dykes era. Some really good highs. He kind of peaked around 9 wins. But Leach came in and he never missed a bowl game. Had a high point of 2008, of course, going 11-2. Was fired after 2009, an 8-4 season. Tech hit 8 wins just twice before this past year. 3 times before Joey. 2 times before Joey McGuire. McGuire's been able to do it twice, but they have not hit 9 wins since they fired Leach. 2009, they got 9 with the bowl game. They have not hit 9 wins since firing Mike Leach.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. One name that I wanted to throw out there in terms of just bad decisions is Mack Brown. I think that was a rushed and hasty decision from the University of Texas when they made the move to move on from him. Got a little bit of stats to try to prove it for a second here. If you look at some of the coaches that had gone before Mack Brown, like before he had gotten there, you can go back to 1981 up until he got there. They won 3 bowl games at the University of Texas. So over the course of a decade and a half, a little bit more than a decade, almost 2 decades, they won 3 bowl games, and Mack Brown won 9 of them while he was there, including a title. I don't understand the decision to move on. I think the problem at the moment was, they had gone a couple of years without getting up to the 10-win mark, right? They had like 5-7, 8-5, 9-4. But the big problem was that 9-4 season was the same year that some of their in-state rivals were doing some stuff, and it was the Johnny Manziel at A&M thing, and I think they were just trying to get back on top of some of it, and they just weren't patient to let Mack Brown get back on top of it. I don't understand. I just don't really understand a lot of the decision-making that went into it. Obviously, that last season he had there in 2013, the 8-5, not the best, but you follow it with Charlie Strong and Tom Herman, a couple of guys who not that much success at the University of Texas. Tom Herman was fantastic in bowl games, but just really came up short on a lot of stuff. Obviously, Steve Sarkisian has made up for the a massive errors and sins and everything else there in Texas. But you think about
it took them a while to find the next guy. They
think about the influence that Texas had lost in the state of Texas, and the amount of dominance that teams like A&M and TCU and even Baylor for a little while had found in the state. You wonder what would have happened if they had just stuck with Mack Brown and said, like, hey, get back on top of this, keep your connections, and we'll be back here in the next couple of years. Instead of the running joke for the almost decade of absence was the whole, is Texas back? Like that was the joke for a decade. And that wouldn't have been a joke, I don't think, if they had kept Mack Brown.
It's hard to say because that tenure was getting a little stale. I think I can hear Texas fans, and you're absolutely right. Maybe it was a knee-jerk reaction to some of the success that rivals were having, but Mack was really old. He's old now, but he was still old like when they made that decision. Now, I think where Texas missed was not being, if you remember that search going back to after the 2013 season when Mac Brown, they announced that he was going to be done at the end of the year. He wasn't officially fired, but it was like kind of a forced retirement situation, I think, if I remember right. But if you're going to do that to somebody like Mac Brown, you've got to be 100% sure that you have a sure thing locked up. The message board talk was that Saban's wife was looking at houses in Austin, and they were sure they were going to get Nick Saban or better at that time. And you end up with Charlie Strong, who had a great run at Louisville, but just not the results or resume to back up replacing a legend like Mac Brown. So for me, it wasn't necessarily letting Mac Brown go. I think it would fit more in the next category of just worst hires. Charlie Strong way, way down the list of guys that they wanted in that coaching search.
The reason I would put this in the foolish firings category is because I don't think Texas realized just how hard it is to land a good coach. I think there was a lot of perspective about, okay, well, Mac Brown's been here and has built up this program. And he did, like, since he got hired back in, what was it? I'm trying to go back and look at the record.
98, I believe.
Yeah, back when he got hired in 98, like, he turned it around. But before that, go ahead and go back. Makovich was a miss. McWilliams was a miss. Akers was a miss. You got to go all the way back to DKR, who ended his tenure in 76. Like, you got to go all the way back to him where it was really, like, a good coach. And so as much as I think Texas had kind of built itself into a big brand, I think they probably needed to acknowledge that Mac Brown is a pretty massive part of building your brand. And that moving on from him was not going to be that easy, that you weren't just going to go out there and hire the biggest possible coach just because there were message board rumors that Saban was interested in you, right? Like, I don't think that you can say that that's fair, that as any program can just – I mean, look at Alabama. Saban left. They hire a really good coach that has kind of a bad year in his first year. Just because you're Alabama and the vaunted Nick Saban built you up doesn't mean that you're automatically an elite program that's just never going to fail. It's still hard to hire coaches. And obviously this is not a one-to-one comparison. I think we all expect that DeBoer is going to have more success at Bama than Charlie Strong had at Texas. But it's not a slam dunk that you're just going to be able to replace a great coach who builds up your program with another great coach who's just going to keep it going. That's not how college football works.
Well, I want to talk about a couple others on this list real quick. To me, I'll go through East Carolina and Kansas real quick, but Ruffin McNeil comes over as an assistant. He was Mike Leach's interim head coach, ironically, at Texas Tech when they let him go. And then he goes to East Carolina. He gets them to a bowl game year one. They go have a down year the second year, but he got them their first 10-win season ever in 2013. They go 10-3, and they're ranked in the top 25 to start the next year. They go 8-5 that year. Then he goes 5-7 after one losing season. They let him go, and the players were absolutely just distraught at that decision. It's another situation where they just have not, as a program, been able to build themselves back up. Mike Houston's done a good job starting that process, and he definitely had some success before he himself was let go, and they made a rally this year. But after they fired Ruffin McNeil in 2015, it was 3-9, 3-9, 4-8, 3-6 in the COVID year. Finally 7-5, but doing it by beating a couple FCS teams, so they didn't get to go to a bowl game. And they finally didn't make a bowl again in 2022 after they had been a consistent bowl team under Skip Holtz and Ruffin McNeil. Kansas, I already did the caveat of we don't really know the full story and what happened there, but the results speak for themselves, right? Mangino gets them to the Orange Bowl. They go back-to-back bowl games, 8-5 the next year in 2008. 2009, I think they started like 5-1 or something like that before losing their last 6 as some of these allegations started to come out. And it was just a wasteland after they fired Mangino. Turner Gill went 3-9 and 2-10. Charlie Weiss got 2 years and some change. They went 1-11, 3-9, 3-9. David Beatty hired a position coach from Texas A&M. They go 0-12, 2-10, 1-11, 3-9. They hire Les Miles for some reason. We'll talk about that in just a second. He has allegations himself and doesn't make it through 2 years. Finally, Lance Leipold rights the ship and gets them in a bowl game in 2022. So if you're doing the math at home, that is 12 seasons of wandering through the desert after you fire Mangino. Here's the most egregious one to me, Garrett, though. Bo Pelini at Nebraska.
Yeah.
Nebraska has still not recovered from the decision to fire Bo Pelini after the 2014 season. Bo Pelini, if you look at the history, he came in and cleaned up the mess of Bill Callahan. Bill Callahan could be on this list for how bad of a hiring he was, firing Frank Solich, who had just he wasn't Tom Osborne winning national championships every year, but Frank Solich himself never had a losing season at Nebraska and won 12, 10, and 11 games 3 years in a row. The year he was fired, he went 9-3. So they hired Bill Callahan. He only has 2 winning seasons in 4 years. Then they hired Bo Pelini. This is his win totals in his years. 2008, 9 wins. 2009 and 2010, back-to-back 10-win seasons. 9 wins in 2011, 10 wins in 2012. In 2011, that's when they moved to the Big Ten. So 9 wins in 2013, 9 wins in 2014. The man never won fewer than 9 games in a season. And we decided at Nebraska that that's just not good enough because he's not Tom Osborne in the 80s and 70s winning national championships every other year. And so we fire Bo Pelini and we get just a decade of wandering through the wilderness. They didn't make another bowl game until this past year at 7-6. They still have not had, Mike Riley did make a couple bowl games with Pelini's players the first couple years, but he goes 4-8 the year after that, after most of those players graduate, and then they don't make another bowl game from 2017 to 2023. It was a program-killing hire. For full stop. They had momentum. They were winning 9 games a year. Nebraska would kill for that right now, and they just let it go.
Yeah, and I think the theme that you're seeing on this is there's a lot of programs that just need to understand who they are and not be ungrateful for stuff like this. If there's just a little bit more patience and a little bit more understanding that, hey, we are what we are. We're not going to let the talk get to us. We're building something. I think a lot of programs would be better off. I think that if you boil down a lot of this is just a lot of coaches not getting enough chances to actually build their program. And, they can't just have 1 year that's a little bit bad before, everything goes belly up and they get fired for it. So it's, I think that's kind of the theme here is, there's a lot of teams that just didn't understand, hey, this guy built the program. We should maybe take a big step back and be a little bit willing to give him some grace when he has a couple bad years.
Well, let's move on to worst hires. So the other side of this coin is hires that were just questionable after firing. So maybe the firing was justified, the results weren't there, but who you got to replace them just was not it. Either a bad fit culturally or just a really questionable hire in general. We'll start with Brian Harsin going from Boise State to Auburn. For me, that's a cultural fit. We can talk about that in just a second.
Yeah.
I also on this list have Chad Morris, who Arkansas hired from SMU. Will Muschamp, who was either a defensive coordinator or was sitting on his couch when South Carolina hired him to be the head coach. I honestly can't remember, but he had been fired from that position at Florida. Les Miles getting hired off the couch at Kansas, like I mentioned a second ago. And then lastly, the most famous meltdown of a fan base of all time when Jeremy Pruitt was hired at Tennessee in the fall of 2017 after a mass protest ensued when it was rumored that they were in agreement with Greg Schiano to be the head coach. So, Garrett, again, I'll let you take this where you want. There's some low-hanging fruit here for you to choose from.
Yeah, there's definitely some low-hanging fruit. Look, there's guys like, Les Miles, Will Muschamp that are trying to pick up pieces at, dead programs, right? Where I'm going to be a little bit sympathetic. Okay, Muschamp, you're picking up.
Muschamp, they kind of ran off Spurrier. They kind of ran off a legend.
Yeah, you're kind
of And then they hired a guy that had just gotten fired from their division rival.
That's okay, fair enough. I'll go Les Miles at the very least. He's trying to pick up pieces at a program like Kansas.
Les Miles was a desperate PR stunt.
He was just, let's see if this will work. We're going to throw up a Hail Mary. This guy eats grass. I'm going to go with him, right? Okay, fine. It is what it is. The ones that I think are the worst types of hires, I'm going to go ahead and say it's Harsin and Morris because those are two guys who, in Brian Harsin's case, Auburn is, I think, the least enviable job in all of college football. I don't think that anyone is going to blame a guy at Auburn for having a little bit of trouble succeeding because you got to go up against Bama and Georgia every single year. Those are your two big rivals, and those are the programs who your fan base wants to beat the most. And those are two of the best programs in the whole dang country. So I don't envy a job at Auburn. However, Harsin made this jump and did a terrible job. Couldn't recruit, had just like no contacts in the South, couldn't get talent there, didn't manage anything there very well. And you know, you look at there is some off the field stuff and there's some drama within the boosters and everything. I get that, but just not a good fit at all. Just not the guy you need leading Auburn. And Chad Morris, like just a bad job by Arkansas, I think, hiring this guy. This is back when Arkansas still cared about the program. This is when Arkansas still was trying to kind of keep up with the Joneses, and just did a really bad job grabbing a guy who a lot of people wanted. I mean, Chad Morris was a guy at SMU that a lot of people wanted. A lot of people were hailing as a great, you know, he's going to be the next big one to make that jump from the G5, and it did not work out. It crashed and burned. They could not keep up. Seemed like a little bit of, you know, the attrition of Arkansas and kind of just making the change is what made it worse. But yeah, just not a great situation for Chad Morris there, and really didn't handle it well.
Yeah, and again, you think about the guys that were fired to make way for these guys. Gus Malzahn, and it was Brett Bielema, right?
I think it was Brett Bielema.
Or was there someone between Bielema and Morris?
I think it was Brett Bielema. I can go check, but I think it was Brett Bielema.
Again, consistent guys that consistently won. If you're in Malzahn's case, the guy that took them to the highest of highs in college football, being right on the doorstep.
It was Brett Bielema. He had gone 4-8 in 2017, so like I get it. But even before that, you had some years at 7-6, 8-5, 7-6. You won a couple bowl games, and I know that's not what Arkansas fans at the time wanted, right? Because like you got to put it in perspective. At the time, Arkansas had gone from Bobby Petrino and winning the Cotton Bowl and all that, and then drama and a motorcycle accident and everything else. And then you turn that around and you're back on the Brett Bielema train. Okay, Brett Bielema gets
don't forget John L. Smith. He told everybody to smile.
Okay.
Told everybody
My mistake for forgetting a guy who went 4-8. But
I'm surprised he went 4-8. Honestly, I thought it was much worse.
Yeah, you're not wrong. But then Brett Bielema comes in there, stabilizes the program, and one bad year and they move on. Right, one bad year and they just say, nope, we're going to move on. We think we got this new guy. Chad Morris goes 2-10, and then 2-8 was very quickly replaced.
Yeah, harder to crash and burn more than Chad Morris did at Arkansas. I will just give honorable mention. I think that's the answer. I think Chad Morris is tops this list. Obviously, there's really bad hires all across college football with these.
And obviously, hindsight's 20/20 because at the time, a lot of people thought that was a decent decision.
I mean, he went 7-5 at SMU the year before. His whole resume was being an awesome high school head coach.
Sure.
And then an awesome, and he was doing it at programs that were well established in the state of Texas. We're talking Stephenville, Lake Travis, and Allen. Right. And he then, I guess Allen was after when he came back to the high school ranks. But Stephenville and Lake Travis are very well established high school programs. And then he's the OC at Clemson forever, and they have awesome offenses. But yeah, when he took over at SMU, it was rough his first couple of years. Finally goes 7-5.
Like SMU was a rough
SMU was not in a great place. That's right.
So like, give him a little credit for making it to 7-5, but it's not like he's like right now. I think a lot of people would view Rhett Lashley in that light, where like, okay, if you hire Rhett Lashley, that's a good spot. You can kind of get the move up to a bigger program. But Rhett Lashley just took a team to the playoff.
Yeah. He is experiencing all-time highs at SMU. You know what? I'll push back on where SMU was a little bit, Garrett, because after further review, June. You know what? Never mind. The June Jones era ended poorly. I forgot that he had a really rough ending to that era.
They had some rough years of Southern.
Yeah, but I think crash and burn wise, I think it's hard to beat that. Yeah. I will give honorable mention to Jeremy Pruitt because that coaching search was fascinating to follow as a neutral party. You had the rebellion of the fan base when it looked like Greg Schiano was the guy. I think they had even agreed in principle to him being the head coach. And then you get that whole blow up led by Clay Travis and a couple other people using his alleged connection to Joe Paterno at Penn State as the reason. It was a stretch.
It's It was a stretch, and it's also like watching what's happened at Tennessee since. You can kind of say like, okay, well, it all worked out,
Well, but
but
Jeremy Pruitt himself got in trouble, and he got
mhm.
them
Yeah,
on.
that's like the other thing is like he got in trouble for some bad stuff too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
he's the guy that famously was paying recruits in McDonald's bags.
yep.
So,
Which
I mean,
nowadays is just convenience and part of a fun NIL package, but
he was ahead of his
back
time.
then you couldn't do that.
He was ahead of his time.
Hmm.
Garrett, let's close out here on our last category. Some fun ones here, just some miscellaneous. And I love this is a big one, guys. If you're listening or watching, would love to know your miscellaneous, just foolish decisions
Oh
in
yeah.
college football history because you could take this so many ways. I have 4 here. The Jimbo Fisher extension and buyout after the 2020 season, I think 2021 season.
It was right after that Orange Bowl win.
Right after the Orange Bowl win, when they thought LSU was coming calling and Scott Woodward was going to steal him to LSU.
And
Florida State,
ironically enough, that was that game where he said we ain't done yet, and they were done.
they were done. After that, there
That was
was
it.
nothing else notable
No
about
bowl
the Jimbo
wins
Fisher.
since then for Texas A&M.
That's rough to hear. FSU, Florida State missing the playoff in 2023 after going undefeated in a power conference. Pac-12 Network in tweet. And this one's going back a little bit. This one's going way before either of our times, but Tulane and Georgia Tech leaving the SEC in the 1960s, Garrett. I want to provide some context to this one because I did a little research. If you didn't know, Georgia Tech and Tulane, along with Sewanee, the University of the South, were former members of the SEC. Georgia Tech and Tulane all the way until the 1960s. But Georgia Tech was frustrated with the scholarship limitations. You could have up to 140 scholarship athletes, combined football and basketball, back then in the 1960s. And Bobby Dodd at Georgia Tech thought that was way too many, and it just led to way too many kids being processed. And so, in the spirit of that, he was also the athletic director. He decided that he didn't want to be in the SEC anymore. He thought that was way too many players. Tulane, a few years later, this is hilarious. And this is from a Google AI summary. So if any of our listeners were actually around back then, first, I'm surprised that we're reaching that audience, but welcome.
Yeah. We're glad you're here.
Or if you're a college football historian that wants to correct the AI summary that I got on this, Tulane thought that their brand was being limited by the SEC, and they wanted to recruit students and athletes at a more national level, and thought that the schedule that they had to play in the SEC was limiting them to that effect. It was too regional. So they decided to leave the SEC and went independent in the late 60s.
It's a big deal. That's maybe not what I would have expected. Maybe not the thing that I would have expected from that AI summary of Tulane. Maybe a little bit different than how I thought that would have gone down. But look, that's so before the time that it's hard to say that it was like a bad decision because I just have no frame of reference for the context. But maybe that was kind of right. I mean, maybe they were like looking at Notre Dame as like another sort of like, ooh, this is a established institution that could be really good at foot. Maybe I have no idea. I think out of the ones that we've seen, the only one, look, the Jimbo contract extension was awful. It's borderline tanked their entire athletic department, just with decisions you can make in terms of money. It's really straining some of that. FSU missing the playoff, terrible decision, disrespectful, bad for the sport. But the Pac-12 network, of all of those, only one of these has cratered a conference and realigned the map like that. You can't say there's anything worse in terms of bad decision making in college football than the Pac-12 network, the Pac-12 conference, Pac-12 commissioners, Pac-12 anything. Just stamp that with worst possible decision that could be made.
It's the SS Kleofkov. It's the SS Larry Scott, our running joke
Here
for the
we
last
are.
few years. Coming
Back
full
in the
circle.
off season, and we've said SS Kleofkov. We're back.
I'm with you. I think how poorly, and it wasn't just one foolish decision, it was a series of foolish decisions that got the Pac-12 to where they ultimately, and there's, to be fair, the Pac-12 is not dead. The Pac-12 will be back and have more schools in it.
You're right. They are definitely back.
They're so back.
They're back the same way Texas was back when whatever it was, Swoops decided to dive across it, and then there was the premature Texas is back. They might be back someday, just like Texas. Texas is back now. They might be back someday. That ain't today.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. The fact that it killed one of the most historic conferences and how short-sighted it was. The distribution model, we don't have to rehash all that in here, but rough to say the least. Garrett, there's been a lot of tomfoolery in college football's history. I've enjoyed this little look down memory lane with you.
It's been fun. I mean, it sucks that, our team makes an appearance on there, but look, if you're a college football fan, there's the great moments, and that's why you follow. But another reason why a lot of people follow is because of this tomfoolery, that you're going to get to look at your team and your program and go, what the heck are we doing? And just kind of got to wear that one for a couple weeks when you go into the office for work. So, look, it happens to all of us. And if it hasn't happened to your program yet, get ready. It's coming around the corner. It's going to be there. None of our programs are going to be perfect or, good forever. If you were to say this, go back 20, 30 years and talk about how Nebraska is where they are, or talk about where Florida State stands right now, or talk about Miami, there's going to be a lot of people that wouldn't believe you. And they'd say, like, come on, be real, be honest with me. Nuh-uh. But here we are. This is where we are now. So, it happens to everybody. And if it hasn't happened to your team yet, then, go ahead and click bookmark on this one and come back to it when your team does some more tomfoolery.
Well said. Well, we're going to be here through the rest of the spring and summer, and of course, the beautiful time that we're waiting for in the fall with games getting started. We're counting down to Farmageddon in Dublin, Ireland to kick off week 0 this year, and we'll be with you all the way through the rest of this offseason. Make sure you're following along at 3TechPod on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribing to the YouTube channel as well so you don't miss a single piece of content that we're putting out this offseason. For Garrett Turney, for Mitch Mason, I'm Trey Reeves. We'll see you guys next time.
Gracious, how about